Hello, everyone. D. Alfred Ostrowski here. In this recording, I'm going to be giving a tutorial / demonstration of an implementation of a decentralized application on the Aptos network. As usual, I will be relying on Amazon EC2 instances. In this case, I'm going to be using a C5 instance. And I'm also going to be cut pasting from my notes in the GitHub below the README install file, so you can follow directly along with that. I'll be following very closely and using the code directly from the Aptos developers documentation. However, in this case, I had to do some slight modifications, both with the installation, in particular, the NPM modules that are closely related to the implementation of the wallet, and also some of the TypeScript code to get everything to work appropriately, in particular, reading it back from the blockchain. And in most cases here, I am tempted to push some of the installation procedures to a separate video. However, due to the reasons with the variation installation of the new additional NPM modules that are unique in comparison to the earlier presentations that I made with this, I'm still compelled to leave this all integrated, but the C5 instance makes everything goes a little bit faster. So let's get started. I already have the client started, and if you are not familiar with Amazon already, and I'm doing this everything out of home Ubuntu, I'll go full screen on this. And again, I would encourage you to take a look at some of my initial videos in this area that I actually went through and did everything from scratch. Once again, if you don't have the comfort level with Amazon EC2. And in short, why am I doing this way, right? Because it's just a great way of technology transfer. I have always been wrestling with local installations, trying to help somebody get up and running. So this may not be your preferred platform, right? And that's fine. But in my opinion, if you can have something that you can get up and running, that can get you that much closer to the particular solution that works for you, giving the particular insight from the administrative standpoint. I have been through numerous tutorials and demonstrations and books and resources that just simply don't work out of the box, right? There's some type of modification, something that you have to do to tweak it to get it to work. And that's what I'm addressing in these videos. Okay, so you can just get up and running. That trumps all. Okay, you could say you read about it or studied it, but did you implement it or not? Okay, at whatever level. So, and here I'm finishing out the node source installation. I don't want to make this a tutorial on Unix administration, right, as usual. So you can look up the details if you're so inclined, okay? But again, here, my goal is to have something that is easily consumed, that you can just get up and running with the example and have the insight of exactly what it took to get it to implement on a particular platform. And this is a great way to have a duplicatable platform by relying on the cloud. And that's what I'm doing. So here I installed Node and Node 20 and was able to verify that. We've installed the Aptos CLI, the PNPM. And if you note, in this particular GitHub, I only backed up the very basic files that are needed here. Okay, and you're not going to be able to clone it out and recreate everything. You have to do the installs anyway. And in any case, even the prior backups that I've done to GitHub just ran out of space, so it's only going to give me a minimal representation here. So just the most important things that we're dealing with. So there, as usual, I am just putting in the minimal responses here, right? Now, if you have been through some of the latest tutorials that I've done in Aptos, you could rely on your past installation, go back to that instance if you have it up and running, and really move forward from the CLI installation. but you're going to have to install the extra npm modules one way or another, whether you do an npm install I do, or follow it to the T as represented on the Aptos developers. Didn't work for me. Okay, so that's why I'm doing it this way. And I also have a Medium article that I reference, and actually picked it up from GitHub before that, but the Medium article adds a little bit more credibility that it's not just a hacky way of doing this, right? It is pseudo-legitimate means of doing this type of approach. So I did everything under home Ubuntu, okay. And in this case, now I'm going to the next step and following through with exactly with the documentation. I am going to create the project directory, my first app, and I'm going to CD to that. And one important point is you got to make sure you're doing everything in the right directory. If you don't, you're really going to confuse the issue. So be careful. And I have the directory specified in my documentation. So you want to take note through that. If you work through this too fast, then you might run that risk, right? So I'm going to create a move directory underneath that, and most importantly, CD to that move, because that's outlines the next step. We're going to do a move init. As usual, I'm going to fully qualify Aptos because I'm not going to play around with an environment file. This is just a sandbox, and I'm going to delete this instance when I'm done. So we're doing a move init, and that's going to give me some of the basic fundamentals for the move development. I think we did this with the my first move module, the TOML file, script, sources, tests, directories. And then the next step is to, and again, all these steps following exactly along with the developer's documentation. I'm going to do an Aptos init for the network, and we're going to be doing this to the DevNet. And I'm going to default, it's going to give me a address and 14b9, and I'm going to copy this out as usual, right? And I'm going to use this for reference. In this case, I need it in particular for the Typescript. We're going to remember this, and I'm going to put this in a notepad, and we're going to use that for later reference, both for the TOML file and the Typescript, okay? So that came back and looked good. We can double check here. We can go into Aptos, the hidden directory that was created through these processes, and just take a look at the YAML file. And you note here, C14B9, so that is the same directory that you see here that I copied out over, right? So that is all this being the same. I'm going to move to the TOML file. And here I'm going to add an entry for the to-do list under addresses. I'm going to call it to-do list, ADDR. And here I'm going to omit the 0x for the address, right? And just add in the pure address here. So I copied off my notepad and make sure I'm in insert node as I am in VI, right? So that should be good to go. Now I can do my compile publish. First, we got to put in the source code. So I'm going to drill down to sources, CD sources, and I'm going to create a new file, right? To do to list move. And I'm going to take the code, as I mentioned before. While I used the slight change with the TypeScript, the move code I'm using verbatim. Okay, so let's copy this in and let's get it up and running, and then we'll break it down a bit, right? So I'm just going to put this in here so we can do the actual compile and publish, and then we're going to go off to the client and do the related installs and work with the appropriate TypeScript code, right? So here again, I'm doing this out of move. Make sure you're in the right directory. Okay, always keep that in mind here. to eliminate any confusion, and hopefully your goal is to duplicate exactly what I've got going on here. So I'm going to do an Aptos move compile and wait for that. This takes a little bit of time. Not too much, but a few seconds longer than I would expect. So let's just wait on that. And then we're going to do the publish, and you could validate this as before. You can take the address and validate it on the Aptos Explorer, but I'm confident it's going to work, right? So, but keep in mind that it will be there. So C14B9, so that's the address and the module. It got some warnings. We're not going to worry about it, right? So next step is the publish, and then we can move on to the client. So let's do that publish and see if we can get a positive result here. Again, a few warnings, no big deal. It's prompting me for the unit price, so on and so forth. And that's a good thing. We got a transaction. You could look that up again. You want to gain more experience with use Aptos Explorer, okay? But or you want to step through and have that confidence that yes, I am actually running to the blockchain. But we're going to omit that I did that in prior videos, right? So now, following with the instructions, they have a test. I'm not going to work on the testing. I may produce to make this a little bit more manageable. I'll deal with testing and more of the separate assertion testing I do. Want to add the assertion test and move is really powerful because you can include it right in your smart contract. So that is really an added benefit over Solidity and some of the other environments, right? So here I'm going to move back to my first app directory. And now I'm going to do create React app. Okay, so create React gives me my basic React project type directory. And as such, I don't want to be doing under move. I want to be doing it under the overall project because I want to create my client environment. NPX is going to both download and install. Gives me a bare bones in some cases, and I may be producing some content on this. You can actually create your own project that give you a little more insight as to the world of React and how it works depending on your experience as a full stack developer. Here, create React apps is more of a quick and dirty way of getting your project set up. So it's basically saying, hey, give me the basics to get up and running with React. And that's what create React does. And again, we're working with Typescript, so we're going to specify that as such and do the NPX. And that's going to be downloading related node packages and a lot of extra software as well. Now, once that's complete, I got two files, an app TSX that I'm going to be pulling in from the Aptos base example, as well as index TSX. Let's just get this up and running. And then, as usual, I'll step through it line by line and explain the code. I'm not going to go through all the intricacies of React. Now we're dealing with a full-fledged client. There's a lot in React. If you don't already know, perhaps you are a full-stack developer, there's a lot of things to unpack with React, but we're going to go through some of the basics as it relates to this particular implementation. So here you can do an npm start. Let me put in I don't need to do the hello world when I do the installs. I'm pretty confident it gets up and running. If you have problems, you might want to rewind it and do, depending on your environment, and do the npm start and just test the hello world and then replace it with your updates. Let's get the particular example that is supported here. So I'm going to first pull in the app TSX, but again, I got to be aware of my directory. Now I have a client, so I'm going to go to the client directory, and under the client, I want to go to source and make sure they get everything in. I have all these here already, but I don't want this. I want the application, and we're not going to be doing live coding it, right? We just want to, this is implementing it, and we'll kind of step through in kind of a live code fashion is the way we're working with it. But again, make this a little bit more amenable to getting up and running and working appropriately. So here I'm going to pull it in, and now I did perform a few slight modifications to this. Let's get it up and running, and then I will go specifically through what I had to do to get this to work. In particular, it was writing the blockchain, but not reading it back. Okay, and I'll tell you what the specifics was and what I had to do to get that to work. But one modification I do to need to get this up and running in particular is I need to update the module address. And that was the address that we saved, right? In this case, I'm going to add it with 0x and delete out the last one. So you don't want to confuse everything, right? You want to make sure that you're pulling in the right address, the one that you just loaded in, right? So it's B9, and make sure that I have it completely loaded in here. That should be good to go. Now I have index, TSX, and I'm going to replace that with their copy. The changes here are primarily related to the implementation of the wallet, and it should be pretty intuitive. There's not a lot of different code here other than the wallet implementation. Let's make sure it works first, right? Before we split hairs on all the details of how it works. So I have everything in here. I'm under client, and then I'm just going to do an npm run start, and that'll start my development server, okay, for my client. So at this point, I want to go to EC2, and the one step that I want to make sure that you're paying attention to is with the security groups, the inbound roles. You are going to want to make sure that you have the appropriate inbound roles. Here it defaults when I just bring up EC2 instances that I've done with some of the other tutorials. And I do use with the Solidity-based tutorial is you need to set at least one rule, all traffic anywhere. And this is going to allow a browser to connect to your EC2 instance, right? Because I'm not running this locally. So I have to set up the role appropriately, IP4 address. And I should be good to go here. So now I can go to my defined instances, and I'm going to grab the DNS at this point. Go back up to details, and not the IP4 address, but the public IP4. And I should be able to pull up a different tab and go to port 3000. Now, one thing I'm not going to step through. Oh, I didn't go through my step with the node modules. There we go. So I do have some problems here. I knew I missed something. Okay, so here, I was speaking to the earlier point, right? That I had the incompatibility with the modules, right? So here I'm going to, under client, I'm going to go to the package JSON, and you can see it didn't come up appropriately. So I'm going to blow out the, and I didn't implement those npm modules yet, right? So let me, and I'm going to grab this. I can grab it directly. I have a copy at my own site. I could go to the GitHub, and I'm going to point out where I grabbed it from. So I actually grabbed this from the Aptos developers, Aptos core move examples, my first app move, and really my first app client, and I'm grabbing the package JSON from there. So I got that copied, and I'm going to, and I have a copy of this on my GitHub, and I'm replacing the package JSON with that. So that gives me the latest definition of the most current revision levels. We do an npm install, you're going to get perhaps a newer one, and you're not going to have, in my case, I had an issue with forward compatibility. So I replaced the package JSON with their package JSON, right? And now I'm going to, from the client directory, I'm going to remove our node modules. Recursive, so everything's blown away, right? And I'm going to do an npm install. And again, this little brute force, but this saves a little bit of time, gives me up and running. And when you're playing around with node modules, there's incompatibilities, it gets into a real gray area of which module is actually giving me the problem and which version of the module, which one is correct. You always want to push forward. You always want to develop to the updated modules. Sometimes you have an incompatibility, and it may be something that you may not be able to program around. So in some cases, it is necessary to back out and do a selective uninstall and then reinstall to a particular version. This shotguns it and just basically says, gives me everything from the package.json and do the remove all the modules and start over, which I did. So it added 1649 packages, and I should be good to go at this point, right? So let me go back full screen on this, and now I can do the npm instart here, run start. There we go. And let's wait for it. Okay, so I was playing around with those security rules. Make sure you set those security rules as well, right? You're not going to be able to get to that. So let's wait on it, make sure it comes up. And you get a Webpack Babel, some type of complaints with that. That's okay as long as it comes up and gets you started here. Let's wait for it. And no issues found. They complain a little bit. Okay, well, we're not going to split hairs over that, right? So now I want to grab that DNS, and now I can bring up my React app. Close out this tab, bring in a new one. And I have set my access rules, my security rules. So port 1000 should come up. There we go. So the app came up. And again, the installation of the Petra wallet, there's instructions on the Aptos developers as where to get it. Should be a Windows-based installation. I did this in conjunction with Chrome. You could use it with probably any browser. Let's do it a wallet connect first. And it brings up specifically, do I want to connect? And it gives me a request. Let's see if it approves it. It looks okay, and it's bringing in, you can see my wallet, and this is really nice. So I have a built-in faucet, and I can get resources really easy. This is great, right? Because you need it. And in some of the other environments, you have to step through, to say the least, more than a few hoops, right, to get some resources just to test. Okay, we're not even talking about production, we're just on an environment. So let's run our Dapp, right? Let's add the list here, and I'm just adding the list. It's prompting here. I'm going to move down my screen and asking me for the approval. Why? Because it's going to be writing to the blockchain, right? So let's write a task. Let's say take out garbage. And see that ad here, right? It prompts me along the way. And it's going to build that list. And let's say walk dog, something of that nature. Wash clothes, so on and so forth. So it looks good. It's adding my tasks to the list. I can also check it off my list, right, and see if that's checked. So I check take out garbage. Now, most importantly, let's start another client, make sure I can read it back. And this speaks to the problem I had implementing this. It would write it, but wasn't reading it back. I'm going to show you what I changed to make that happen. It's all within the context of the Typescript. And it's back, even has the check mark here, right? So I can say fourth task, and I can go on and on and on with the list. I'm writing the blockchain, I'm reading it back, and it looks good. Okay, so I was able to compile and publish the smart contract. We installed the environments for both the client and server, tested my client, and I reinstantiated it, and everything looks really good. Let's look at the source code and discuss how it happened and break it down line by line. Okay, let's start with the move code. Okay, let's go to move, and again, the sources. And let's go to our to-do list. Okay, I'll go full screen on this and we can break this down appropriately, right? And again, for brevity, not that it isn't important, right? I skip the testing. We can look at that at a later point in time. That's kind of a separate animal. And I wanted to keep this a little bit shorter because this is getting, these videos are getting a little bit longer, right? So don't want to make it too long. So with the module as usual, we start with account address and the name. And it's important to note, right? Now with the wallet, I have a wallet address and I have an account address. The two are not to be confused, right? When I have the account address is associated with the writing of the blockchain. So if I want to make references to the development network with the Aptos Explorer, I'm going to need that account to specify that. So this essentially, the to-do list address is specifying that specific account address, the one that I did with the initial init and what I put into the TypeScript contract, right? So, and here I have the standard library, Aptos framework, signer framework, table. And here I defined some error codes, pretty straightforward. Here we have a structure, and this is important, right? The to-do list contains associative array or a table, if you will, that has uint description that is pointing directly to each task. And as such is defined as key, right? Because it's supporting a key structure inside of it. I throw a key at that table, it's going to give me back a particular task. And I'm going to be modifying that table as I go along. So that motivates these additional attributes of store.copy named appropriately, right? That are going to give me the ability to read, write, copy to the given task. It's going to have an ID, the address that's serving as my key, if you will. And I have the specific address and the content, and then a Boolean is going to be set for that counter for whether it's completed or not. Also, I have a task counter that's numbering the number of tasks appropriately. So that would be set at 4 with this particular example. So create list, it takes my account that I created initially with the Aptos init, and that's my signer, okay? And it's going to initiate the table with the task and set that counter to 0 in the context of to-do list. And it's going to move a reference of that to the given signer account. It's going to be physically written to the blockchain. For each create task, I've gone through that's initiated through the push button, and that's going to be driven by the TypeScript right here. I grab the signer address of account. We validated that it actually working through the assertion. And then the borrow global mutable, that's going to grab an address of the to-do list and pass it in appropriately. And I'm going to use that to increment the counter and support the creation of a new task. So here I have a task structure that's being created, and I'm going to take that as information that you can identify here with the create task. It takes content as a string. Those were the strings that I was writing in, right in that text box, and that's being passed in here with the content that you see here in the third place. And Upsert is going to write that into that task table, and it's going to record it on a blockchain. We proved that to ourselves, right? So I'm going to be, I did, right? We wrote it and I reinstantiated it and it read it back. So the Upsert wrote it to the blockchain, and they're going to be reading it back out, and correspondingly using that reference to the to-do list, I updated the counter appropriately. Complete tasks is the same thing, except it just sets that Boolean for me, right? And it's going to read in the task ID. That's my uint. And the account, okay, the account that I'm using, all right? You grab the signer of that account, the assertion, make sure I did it. And the global mute is going to give me a reference to that structure and assert that it is there. And the assertion, right, this is the essence, right, of smart contract. Every step along the way, did we do exactly what we intended to do? That's what the assertions are buying us. And it may be somewhat extraneous, but it's necessary, right? But that's the essence of doing, you know, Web3 development, right? So here I take the task associated with that task ID and assign that to task record. And I just assign from that reference the completed to true, right? That's it. That's a smart contract. The rest are the remaining is the assertions, and we'll take a look at that at another time, right? So let's look at the client at this point and wrap things up, right? So I'm going to go to the client source and go to app. Now the index.tsx, there's just some slight modifications just to support the wallet library, right? So here, let's go top to bottom on this. Okay, so I import the appropriate libraries and design. That's going to give me an extra library for the front-end development work, in particular working with the layout row, column button, spin checkbox from the anti library. We have hooks from React that allows us to really serve as global memory, okay? And this gives a more efficient means as opposed to let's say think of a global level var in JavaScript, right? And working with the hooks gives you more of a standard object-oriented paradigm of dealing with these, and it's advertised as giving you a lot more efficiency within the context of that environment. So consider that fashion. And then we have our associated wallets with React. So I had problems with these, okay? I've tried the instructions as presented in Aptos developers, didn't work for me, okay? I had assumed that to be a forward compatibility, probably worked for them when they did it, or maybe it's a variation with the platform. But using the package JSON, that was integral to me, okay, because I was able to, let's just blow it away. First and foremost, let's get up and running, okay, so that was my approach. So I pull in the Aptos environment, and I set that module address. We did that earlier. We have the hooks defined here appropriately to access the tasks, set up the states with the task, and use the wallet appropriately. So on change event, okay, for those of you familiar, okay, you have an event-based interface, and someone writes in a new task, and it's going to invoke the set new task, okay? And that is going to initiate this, okay? Fetch list is going to pull in the existing list from the blockchain, right? So how's that accomplished? We make sure we have the appropriate account. If not, we just return. Otherwise, we use account resource, and then we invoke using, and think about how you'd access this from the Explorer, right? You would take or how it would be structured as you reference it from the Explorer, right? You would look at the module address, to-do list, and to-do list being the exact structure that you're working with. So that's what get account resource is referencing, and it's taking from that account, look at the particular data structure that was represented on the blockchain, right? And we set account has list, just setting that to true. Now this didn't work for me, okay? The to-do list has any, which should just accept any type of data structure. It didn't return anything for me for reasons completely somewhat unbeknownst to me to this day, but I did the following modifications, just grabbed tasks handle, and I omitted data so you can look at my change, Maybe it works for you. Okay, it didn't work on this platform. Okay, so this is what I had to do to read it back. I demonstrated that by duplicating the address in a new tab, and we pulled it back. Yes, I did, and you could break it down. We could split hairs and go into the Aptos Explorer, as we've done before, and I'll have a PowerPoint detailing some of the explorations. I'm not going to fumble with the addresses, but I'm going to show you exactly how I referenced it and how you can expand your repertoire, both looking at the resources that are posted to the network and at what step are you still publishing it, because at that point the question is, did I write it at all? So if I can say, hey, it is written, but I'm not reading it back, and that was the case here, it wasn't writing it back, and it was due to the table handle not returning appropriately. This fixed it for me. I printed out a console log. Is invaluable for your client-side testing, in my humble opinion. Okay, you're using Chrome, you go to the developers console. I like Chrome. It seems to be a little bit easier to work with when you're doing this. Okay, it would be nicer to also do command line, which I've done with Solidity. However, when you're in the midst of an application, you just got too many commands to step into a particular scenario, which what we have here. Same thing with the task counter. I made that modification. These are the only two modifications that I did to this. Everything else is verbatim to their defined tutorial, right? So here, and again, this was with the fetch task list. So I'm incrementing through the counter, and I'm pulling this in from the blockchain, and I'm pushing this to the data structure, to pushing it to tasks and dumping that to my browser, so you can see an incrementing counter along the way. And we're using the get table item to accomplish this, and it's asynchronous. That's why we're using the wait here and pushing into that data structure. And then the set task is also set appropriately, that they were updated in appropriate fashion. Add new list. Okay, that's called to invoke the create list, and we saw how that worked on the module side. And this is, again, working in similar fashion, where we set the hook, set transaction and process, and then we call the appropriate create list from the function using input transaction data, right? And we do a try catch here, and here we wait for that, do a submit on the transaction, wait for it, set the hook appropriately, and if we have an error, we set it appropriately as well. Similar fashion with create tasks, it's called in a similar type of format. Check for the account, set the transaction and process to be true. So this supports the asynchronous activity through the invoking of these hooks. And then we set input transaction data and invoke, pass in the associated information of the data, invoking that function for create list and the associated tasks. Then here we hold the latest task ID from our local state and build the new task to push object into our local state, so that could be submitted and updated appropriately, and then set the task to identify that. On checkbox change, in similar fashion, right? Either you're going to be updating it for the content for the task list or that Boolean, and here we're just setting that Boolean, so it's undergoing a similar fashion, input transaction data, passing that data, including the function and the associated arguments, in this case, the task ID, and it's just updating it, right? That it's going to be checked off. And then the try catch is managing the asynchronous activity of submitting it, wait for the transaction, and we've seen some of these similar dynamics more from the command line when we work with the move module as well. We set that to true and log any errors appropriately. So use effect That kind of happens behind the scene. That calls fetch list. And that happened when we took the code and I put it in a new tab and it updated it, and that called fetch list that says, hey, load in everything that got off the blockchain. And let's see it show up on the screen. So here we have the latest HTML. I'm not going to split hairs on everything involved here, but you can see we're relying on the anti-library. And you can match this up with the interface to see how that is put together and invoked. And you can see on the on chains, it calls the right task. On click calls add new list. And the checkbox change as well is going to set the appropriate call, okay, to perform the module. And you see here the Explorer, Aptos, and this gives you, again, you can get a lot of ideas how to explore this separately on the Aptos environment through the Explorer, but just by looking how they stack the REST style commands here, in particular the H reference, that they're just calling it directly out of the blockchain. Once again, using that account. And as I mentioned earlier, that account information is really important to get this all up and running and working appropriately. And that's pretty much it. So I went through a lot of the basics and I gave you my modifications. And again, everything is documented on my GitHub. So I went through, and I also have some details on the steps as to look up some of the specifics, in particular related to the validation of the task, which I had to step through myself again to identify that change in the TypeScript, to identify where I had to change to get it to work. But again, most of this was taken directly from the Aptos demonstration and resources, which are outstanding. But again, there's always something, and it's that 2% that takes 80% of your time in most cases. So thanks for listening. Hope this helps. Again, all the resources on my GitHub, and take care. Thanks for watching. Bye now.